When it all went crazy in Parliament, I actually thrived because I weren't used to people saying nice things about me and thinking I was the answer to the question. So therefore, that's kind of situation where it's quite a hostile environment, people are unsure about what's going on in the future. That was quite natural territory for me. So I actually thrived in what was probably one of the most turbulent times in Westminster. So yeah, I think it...
Gosh, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
The idea that sort of, ego, in a sense, has never been a priority. Or you haven't had the luxury of developing a massive
exactly,
ego.
because a lot of people who were in Parliament had been around Parliament for a long time. They'd maybe been special advisors, or they knew that's a career what they wanted, and they come from quite stable backgrounds, and therefore the whole thing being turned on its head and everyone not quite understanding what was going on was quite discombobulating for them. But for me, it was like, this is what I'm used to. This is life for me as a working class kid growing up in a chaotic household, and not knowing what was going to happen next is quite normal territory for me. So I actually found it all quite intriguing and energetic. I loved it.
Why energising. I can see why, or I need to remind you that Cummings said that Johnson likes chaos because it means everybody has to come to him to find out what to do next. So there's something unexpectedly that you have in common with the current Prime Minister.
To be honest, I have actually been, described as kind of a Boris type figure myself because of we're both kind of bombastic, and I sort of get that. But I think what my sort of understanding of the way I analyse it is that I'm kind of used to being in those chaotic situations, and therefore I'm looking at solutions.
Right.
Boris likes to create chaotic situations to distract from the fact that he hasn't got the solution. So I think there's different. I've seen agitators. I've seen it in the union movement and in management. People who are really not that good at their job, so they create distractions because they don't want to really get into the detail, because if they get into the detail, they'll be exposed as the emperor's new clothes, and they're actually quite naked on the issue.
So before we sort of wind the clock right back to Stockport in 1980, that typifies your career, doesn't it? You're doing it now with the contracts, with the perceived cronyism and corruption. Yeah. You did it as a union rep when you attended council meetings and hung on their every word and didn't let them get away with everything.
Exactly.
So I think you do yourself a disservice, or at least the people who described you as bombastic do you a disservice, because you're building it, as you say, upon detail and evidence rather than upon distraction.
But I think that came from, because I wasn't educated, I didn't leave school with qualifications, and then I remember going into my first meeting as a shop steward, as a home carer, and I was in with management, and I think these were really important people in suits, and I thought they must know a lot, and I was really nervous. Yeah, I was really nervous about going in. I'm seeing the senior management, the director of social services. I mean, social services took your kids away from them and neighbours. Yeah. That's how I knew them. So these are really important suits for me. So I was shaking. I was so petrified. And I remember sitting down and thinking, I don't know if I'm going to be able to contribute to this meeting at all. And then within 20 minutes thinking, these people haven't got a clue. and I just couldn't sit on my hands. And that's kind of my family would say that to you, is I was always, I'm the only ginger in my family. So I think they saw the redhead connection and the fieriness. But if I think something's wrong, I just say it. I can't sit back and think, let that happen. And because in those early days, me thinking that these people must be really important, they must know a lot, that stuck with me. So still, I think it's that chip on my shoulder, maybe that bit of my background that thinks, I need to know my stuff here. Right. Because these people are really important people. So if I don't know what I'm talking about, I'll be exposed as being inadequate. And it's that feeling of inadequacy as not quite good enough that spurs me to make sure that I do my homework on it, because I don't want to disappoint. I don't want to look bad.
So it's know your stuff or know your place. And you refuse to know your place.
I refuse to know my place because I'm the sort of person that if I think something's wrong, I think I have to say it. And I've always stood by my principles on that. And I think I get that from my nana, because she was very outspoken and she was very similar to me. And I think it's just ingrained in my personality and the way I was made. But I also think this business of not wanting to embarrass people like me and not wanting to be seen as not knowing what I'm talking about. That fear of being humiliated means that I don't want to ever go into a meeting and think I don't know what I'm talking about. You know, I just think it's natural to want to, if you know, I represented people in the workplace, and you know, I read the documents and I had to look for things to support people, and I always overestimated senior management.
Yes.
I always overestimated.
It's almost deferential, isn't it?
Exactly. So it kind of gives me the edge, because I think Boris Johnson underestimates people, because people like Boris Johnson have always had a privileged background. They've always had things that was almost implied they would get anyway.
Yes.
So they're at a disadvantage to me, because I come from a position of I never had that. So therefore I have to overestimate them, and I often underestimate my ability, whereas they often overestimate their ability and underdeliver.
This is the stealth that you've spoken
Exactly. Of. That's what I spoke about when I was a union rep. Yeah. Underestimate me at your peril.
Yes, except that and I went to a school similar to Boris Johnson's, and I learned similar skills. We learn, and in fact it's prized from very early on, to be able to bluff and bluster your way through almost any situation. It's a tragedy. It's a national tragedy that it's prized so highly, and it's propelled two of the last 3 prime ministers to.
And it explains a lot as to why, when I got in the boardroom, things were so dramatically bad.
Liberating, though, to realise
it was, because I realised, like, I sat there and I remember, like, 20 minutes into the meeting, and I thought, I know more than these people do, and it did, and it gave me confidence, and I've just kind of like. I've gone from strength to strength. When I took Boris Johnson on at the dispatch box when I was doing PMQs, you know, he'd had Ed Miliband completely mauled him a few days, I think it was about 5-6 days earlier. Then Kieran mauled him, and he was having a lot of trouble on his backbenches. So I thought, why is he taking me on? Because he obviously thinks he can beat me. Because I thought he doesn't want. Yeah, I thought, why is he taking me on at PMQs? Because he could have easily have ditched it for somebody else. Because Keir obviously couldn't do it because he was self-isolating. So I thought, gosh, he's taking me on because he thinks he can wipe the floor with me. So again, I over-prepared for it, thinking this guy who's the Prime Minister is really now thinking he's got to like sucker me one to get himself back up on top with his backbenchers and to look great. And anyway, he stumbled at the first question, and that was great. I felt really powerful. Then after that, I thought, right, well, you're mine. I'm having you.
A red rag to a redhead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
When did that first manifest itself then, Angela? That determination to speak out when something is unfair?
I don't know. I mean, my dad said that I was always, you know.
I don't know much about your dad. I know a bit about your mum.
Yeah, so like I was, like I say, the ginger thing was quite a theme when I was growing up. So, because my brother and sister, mum and dad all have dark hair, and we had these rules once, and my dad put them on the wall, and it was like, you know, if it's crying, give it a cuddle. If it's dirty, clean it. If it's on the floor, pick it up. And I put, if it's grounded, let it out. And I always had this, like, I wrote this rule on the back, and my dad was like, you know, I was always the child that was rebellious. You know, my dad used to have to pick me up from nightclubs when I was like 14 because he couldn't stop me from going. Yeah. So it got to the point where he's like, I will pick you up outside, and then I know you're getting home safely, because I was just a rebellious child. There's just something in my genetic makeup that says that, and I have this strong sense of justice as well, and maybe that's because, you know, I saw a lot of injustices and I saw a lot of people struggle when I was growing up. Yes. And I just have I have this nurturing nature. My mum obviously had a lot of mental health problems.
But you say obviously, people won't know this because the media is more interested in easy scores, isn't it? Easy goals. But your mum was very poorly, and you took quite a lot of responsibility for her from a very early age. Yeah. And I suppose that's where my determination to be a strong person is as well, because I saw my mum broken. And the one thing that I always thought in my life was that I will never get to that stage. Not part of it was pitying my mum, but the other part of it was like, you know, I don't want to be a victim. And what my mum's been through, I felt my mum's very courageous, because, you know, anyone who's had mental health will know getting out of bed is like a massive issue for you if you've got a mental health problem like that. Getting through your day when you literally think the world is ended for you, and actually just physically being able to get up and function takes tremendous strength to do that. So I don't belittle my mum's struggle, but I also felt I don't ever want to get to that point. I don't ever want to be reliant
on somebody to look after me like that. And I just chose to be a fighter. I made a decision that, you know, I didn't want my life to be as difficult as my mum's was. I saw it up close and personal, the pain that my mum went through, the absolute agony that she went through in her own head. And I just felt that, you know what, something inside me thought, you have to fight that. You can't be that.
But I think you're at pains to acknowledge that you don't get to control it either. So it's not as if your mum could have chosen necessarily differently. But
and that's kind of this is why I'm so passionate about social justice and some of the early years stuff and that as well, because I know where the root cause of that is with my mum. I know where it manifests itself. You know, I know the patterns of deprivation.
Where does it?
So my mum was from a family of 12 in Wythenshawe. She didn't go to school. She was bullied. She wasn't loved. There wasn't cuddles. There wasn't nurturing in her house.
She never learned to read or write.
My mum couldn't love me. She told me that. She said, I didn't know how to love you. You know, I don't know how to love my kids.
Right.
She didn't learn how to read and write. She couldn't look after us. It wasn't because she didn't want to. She was just a very neglected person herself. So she grew up.
It's an emotional language.
Yeah, and the deprivation that my mum suffered, it's a deprivation. It wasn't a lot of what happened to my mum was acquired through lack of opportunity for her. And by the time I got to my mum, you know, she was just in such a dark place and the system had just completely, you know, beaten her down that it was very hard to get her into a better place. That's why I am so passionate about early intervention, early years and support for people, because breaking people, it's really hard to fix them once you've broken them. It's really hard to fix them once you've broken them. Whereas if you nurture people, and some parents don't have the ability to nurture. My parents didn't have the ability to nurture me. My mum didn't have the ability. And luckily for me, my nana was on hand as well, and the community. So
that would be your paternal grandmother.
Yeah. So
right.
My nana was like, she was on hand. She worked like 3 jobs. She grafted. I mean, my nana lived in high-rise flats, so I used to joke because we go my nana's for a bath because we couldn't. That she had hot water. We didn't have hot water. It was too expensive. So we'd traipse to my nana's on a Sunday and all have a bath, and we'd go in rank order. So my older brother would get the bath first, then my mum would get it, and then me and my little sister would share the bath afterwards. It was like, and then there was like a brown rim around it after we'd all finished.
You mentioned the neighbours and social services. Were you ever in danger yourself then?
I think, you know what, in modern days, definitely we would have gone. But my nana bought our uniform, so she'd take us to the charity shop to get our uniform. My mum couldn't cook. Gosh. I mean, we didn't. I mean, everything went in a frying pan. It was chips and chips, chips and sausage, chips and, you know, like literally everything went in a frying. And my mum, I joke, my mum used to give us jelly and shaving foam because she used to look on the picture. She didn't know what the food was in it. You know, we had dog meat once because she thought it was stewing steak because she couldn't read it. Gosh. You know, so there was we used to laugh about it and joke about it. But, you know, in modern times, we probably would have ended up in the system. But because of my nana took a very keen interest in trying to, she worked 3 jobs, she was there, you know.
Where was your dad? What was your dad doing?
He was around, but he was out. You know, it was that day and age where he'd go out and he'd be out all day, and we wouldn't see him all day, and he'd come back late at night. You know, I remember, you know, that. Bumping down the stairs in a pillowcase, and then my dad would open the door, but you'd be halfway downstairs and you know you were going to get it when he like literally falling at his feet as he turned up. Oops, yeah, exactly. So that was a common theme as he was coming back in, but we were supposed to be in bed, sort of thing.
When did you realise that other families were different from yours, and that your setup was?
You see, now this is interesting because, like, I grew up in poverty, but we didn't see ourselves as growing up in poverty. We grew up on an estate, and you were all the same. But there was a hierarchy even on the estate, so I wasn't a family that was well known and well connected.
Right.
So, and because my mum didn't brush our hair before we went to school. We had Alsatians in the house, so it was just full of fur.
Yeah.
So I used to get bullied relentlessly on the estate, and I learnt my place, and I learnt also how to communicate with people to stop myself getting, you know, egged or smashed or battered on me. Yeah, I learned the street.
Yeah.
I learned the street life, and I learned that, you know, there's ways of going about things to get things done and to avoid getting a slap.
What sort of ways?
Just like to not be too bolshy, to try and appeal to people's nature and things like that, you know. And I always say I know when it's going to kick off in a pub. I can feel the atmosphere.
The air changes.
Yeah. Like, it's dead weird. It's, you know, I can feel an audience. You know, it's like, you know how people say read the room?
Yeah.
I can read a room. I'm often very, very acute to it, you know, fine-tuned. And I think that comes from, again, being a bit of a street kid.
Oh, it's learned experience.
It really is,
isn't it?
yeah. And it's hard to sort of put a, you know, to put a sort of academic teaching on it. No. And everything I learn has been, you know, because I've had to beg, steal and borrow my way through to get to where, you know, to sort of get myself surviving as a young person.
I get that. So that would be the hierarchy in your...
And I learnt the hierarchy in society very well as well.
Well, except
you know.
I don't think you're a massive respecter of it.
No, I'm not anymore.
Which is good. But I still don't know when you would have clocked that you were deprived, if you see what I mean, when you'd have known what perhaps a middle class family was like,
It was when I became
or a wealthier working class.
It was when I became a home help.
It was that late.
It was when I was a home help, and bearing in mind I was a home help at 18.
So you were already a mum by this point.
Yeah, I was a mum. Yeah, and that's how I became a home carer. So I left school, had Ryan when I was 16, just turning 17, and then I went to work in a care home, washing pots and things like that, and then I started doing home care, because obviously care workers at the time, I'd always nurtured my mum, and I had a son and I had my baby, so I thought, well, they didn't need qualifications and this is right for me, and it kind of gelled with who I was. But when I became a home help, I started meeting and mixing with people who had professors, doctors, you know, all different walks of life, who were dying and needed palliative care and things like that. So it was very humanising. So the barriers that were there when I was younger were suddenly completely peeled away because they needed me.
Of course.
And therefore it changed the dynamics of the relationship, and I suddenly started seeing them as not doctors or professors. I saw them as humans in need of care, and they didn't see me as the girl off the council estate.
Covered in dog fur.
Yeah, they saw me as she's crucial for me getting out of bed and for my survival
and that was the first time you kind of clocked the comfort in which other people live or can live, even though you encountered them in such difficult times.
Yeah, I'd walk up to their houses and they were huge and massive and amazing. I'd just be like, wow. You know, it was just... But then, again, they were so humble. I remember going to these big, huge houses and they'd live in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And then, like, I'd be like, can I get you... I'd want to make them a dinner, a really nice dinner, and they wouldn't spend the money on themselves because this is the war generation. Right. That was the other interesting factor. So I had this preconceived idea that rich people like to spend loads of money, whereas a lot of the people... Yeah, exactly. I had this mad idea about what rich people were. Sure. But, like, these professional people who I met who had done well often came from humble backgrounds, and then often went back to, you know, they wouldn't... I remember this little old lady living in a kitchen, and she used to put the gas hob on for an hour just to heat the room, and that was it. That's all she'd allow herself. She had, like, loads of money in the bank. I used to have to report thousands of pounds that she'd stuffed everywhere in the house because that was obviously a safeguarding issue. But she wouldn't put the heating on.
It's weird
because it's that generation that were like
losing it as well.
They just wouldn't use the money on themselves. You know, it was very humbling to me because suddenly all my preconceived ideas about what people were like were suddenly called into question, and then looking after people. I was a Samaritan when I was 18 as well, and I did counselling courses as well, and they wouldn't let me do my diploma because they said nobody wants to be counselled by an 18-year-old. I was prevented from doing that, but I was one of the youngest Samaritans in the Northwest. But there's something incredibly...
Why did you do that? Just briefly, the day you decided to become a Samaritan, because you obviously money was tight. There's no money in volunteering as a Samaritan. Why did you do that?
Because I'm a natural nurturer, and I'd looked after my mum and I'd seen the pain.
So
that
it feeds
people
something inside you that you need to feed.
Helping people.
But you had a baby. You had a 2-year-old baby at home.
I did, and my nana was dying of cancer. My mum was like mentally really struggling because my nana was her biggest crutch. Yeah, she'd helped to raise us, and she was everything. And my nana was really in a lot of pain and was dying of cancer, and I had a 1-year-old. You know, it was quite a lot.
Is it possible that you almost temporarily hide from the trouble in your own life by helping people deal with the trouble in their lives?
Maybe so, yeah. I just know that I get, even now, if I'm helping somebody and I'm advocating for somebody and I can make a difference to help somebody, then I get an incredible kick out of that, and it makes me feel valid.
Valid?
Yeah. Makes me feel like I've done something worthwhile.
Right.
Like, that's always been something that triggers me, is that if I feel like, you know, I did the WASPy campaign. That was my first thing that I did at the dispatch box when I was made a shadow minister for pensions. And I remember standing there, and the girls who had worked alongside the home carers, they were the WASPy women.
Yeah, of course.
And they were up on the balcony.
Oh, mate.
And I'm stood there, and I'm like, because people often say to me, like, do you not, like, completely crap yourself? Do you not, like, really get scared when you're at the dispatch box? And I'm like, yeah, but there's something inside me that kicks in because it's not about me.
Right. Right.
When I'm talking about me, it's more uncomfortable.
Okay.
And like when people give me compliments, I find that a bit, it's difficult to accept them. Like, it's difficult to accept cuddles because we didn't have them when we was growing up. Yeah. So that's what comes back to that. I'm quite happy in a hostile environment. It's natural to me. It makes me feel familiar. But I'd like, when I'm at the dispatch box, I'm not there for me. So I can detach from that, and that gives me strength because I'm advocating for somebody else. So I'm fighting somebody's battle. Yes. If I was fighting my own, I don't know, I think that might be a bit more difficult, but often it's because I know I'm doing good by someone else, and then that makes me feel good. So it's
the absence of ego again, isn't it?
It just makes me feel good. Yeah. It's like it's my natural addiction, is that if I've helped somebody, and that's why I'm a natural nurturer, and hopefully people see that in the way in which I work with my staff and the way in which I work with my colleagues.
And it makes sense of the fairly swift progress from home carer to getting involved with the union. But I want to rewind first because we've skipped school.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a theme in your life? Or
School to me, I mean, first of all, again, at the time, didn't know this, but I went into school, not school ready, they call it. You know, they call it school readiness. Yeah. Well, my mum didn't read or write. We didn't see a book. So I was not school ready. And apparently my mum said I needed speech and language therapy as well. So that tells you a lot. When all my trolls that often troll me on social media, there's a reason why I've got a lisp. Thank you very much.
The Pope's just been talking about that.
Yeah.
And he's described his critics, his trolls, as the work of the devil.
Oh,
so I think we can run with that.
Okay, well, well, if the Pope says it, exactly. Then I will bow to his superior knowledge.
They'll pick on anything that they think makes other people feel the shame.
I went into school, and obviously my language wasn't up to scratch, and neither certainly reading and social skills and things like that. Yeah. I didn't have them in the same way that other children did when they went into school, so I was already behind. Yeah. And then I think, you know, the further up the food chain you go, I had problems. I didn't go home and my mum could help me with my homework. No. So my homework wasn't done. You know, I often didn't have breakfast in the morning. I was starving. School was a place to get food. Right. That's how I saw it. It wasn't a place to learn. I was distracted a lot of the time when I was at school. And then by secondary school, that was it. It was like I was going out and I was a street kid.
So you never really engaged.
So I never really engaged in the academic sense of education. I just...
And again, you wouldn't even be conscious of missing out on anything.
Too many rules as well.
Right, okay. You know, no inspirational teacher, no teacher that cut through and reached you.
Well, I mean, my English teacher once, Mrs. Travis, she was absolutely amazing, and she once wanted to help me with my spelling because my spelling is dreadful. Anyone who reads my Twitter feed will know that. They'll know when I've done a tweet. And you know, my spelling is dreadful, and she once stayed behind and tried to help me with my spelling. I thought, why is she bothering with me? I thought, she's so important, why is she bothering with me? And that cut through. But it didn't cut through in terms of academia. It made me feel like I was important.
Seen.
Yeah, and I always say this, the most precious thing you can give somebody is your time. It's the most important thing you can give someone. You can't get it back. You know, these minutes you've spent with me now, you won't get them back. They've gone. That's it. I hope they were valuable. But it is. The most important thing you can give somebody is your time. And
not many people gave you their time then.
And I know
you're not into self-pity, but that is quite a poignant picture.
Yeah, I mean, my dad said we should be seen and not heard. You know, we were just byproducts of a relationship.
That's an odd one, isn't it? For that class, that generation of people to honestly think that being seen, and I mean, I know he's talking about the children, but he'd also be sort of pointing three fingers back at himself when he points one finger at you. We're back to deference and knowing your place, aren't we?
Exactly, yeah. And as I've got older, I understand how the systems create that barrier for people, and that's why I get so agitated when people say, well, it's your fault you're in that situation. Of course, people have free will and can, if they're given opportunity and they choose not to take opportunity, that's different. But don't put people in poverty by policies that you don't have a clue about, and then tell them that they're the problem as to why they're in that problem in the first place. I get so agitated by it. It's like the universal credit stuff now, and I am going to get political on it because it really cheeses me off. It's because people are working, they're in work, they don't want benefits. I went to work because I wanted to prove that I could be a good mum. I wanted to buy things for my son. I didn't want welfare. I've not met a working class person yet that wants to have to rely on the state. It's just absolute rubbish that people want that. Yes. My best friend from school had to ring me up crying because her children had wet the bed and she couldn't afford mattresses for them, to ask me to give her a loan. She was absolutely devastated that she had to ask me to pay for mattresses for her children because she was in that situation financially. People do not choose the poverty. People want opportunity in the round. Of course, you'll always find one that one exception to that. But I'm sorry, if you think working class people enjoy being on any form of in-work support or welfare, then you do not understand working class people and you do not understand the British people, because most people want to graft, look after the family, enjoy their life and get on with it.
Sure.
And be happy. And that's what really annoys me, because they deliberately push people down and then somehow say, well, that's your fault. You've not worked hard enough.
Or you can just do two more hours overtime.
Exactly, the government minister the other week, saying like literally if you just do 2 more hours, it'll be all right. Yeah. And it's like, you've got no idea how much people are struggling and how they're trying their best.
And it's when you got pregnant at 16, was that what people told you? I think your own dad did, didn't he? That's it.
I mean,
that's it. You've done it yourself. You
exactly. Yeah.
So it could have ended there.
Yeah.
You could have. I mean, clearly you weren't going to end up like your mum for a variety.
I saw lots of disappointment.
Did you?
Everyone's face was pretty much destined.
But people weren't expecting great things of you at that age, because you hadn't. As we've established, you hadn't shone at school, or it's not as if you were throwing away your glittering exam results that were just over the horizon.
But I'd almost like proved them right that I was,
When you say them, who do you mean, Angela?
I think everyone's society, people who...
where you felt you'd been put.
Yeah, I just felt that everyone just assumed that was always going to be the case, wasn't it? That was it. Yeah. This was always going to be her
Was there any other question, any question of keeping the baby? Was that ever...
Yeah, it was always for me. I was just... Because, you see... Ryan to me was everything even back then, because I suddenly had an opportunity. I didn't care about me at that time. I was, I was taught not to care about me. I was taught that I wasn't worth anything. So I was worthless in my view. And I don't say that to be a victim, but that was the reality of it. I didn't value who I was or what I could, who I am. I didn't have those values.
Possess any of the things that the society you lived in seemed to value.
Yeah, I didn't have any of that. Yeah, so for me, I was worthless,
Okay.
But I don't say that in a way that I was crying. I wasn't, because I was determined to make the best of what I was, because I wasn't going to be my mum, but I was worthless. So that's how I just saw that
valueless.
Yeah, and that's how I saw myself in life. But when I got pregnant, Ryan was everything to me. He was suddenly my world. He was everything.
From day one.
It made me
from
feel
before
like he had
Ryan
a
was
value.
Ryan.
Even from when I knew I was pregnant, I was like, I've got value.
Right.
I'm growing something.
So there's two weird things going on there. On the one hand, it's a vindication for all the people who presumed the worst of you, and on another hand, it's the best thing that's ever happened to you.
Yeah, I was happy. I was really happy about it. I suddenly felt like I had something of value.
Yeah.
That was mine.
Yeah.
That I could nurture and I could do. And that's why I grafted. Like, my life would be completely different now if I'd not had Ryan.
Because you started a career.
He gave me a reason to get a career, get a job, push against the system and fight for him with every grain. I didn't fight for me because I didn't think I had a worth. I fought for him because he meant everything to me.
Did you think your relationship with his dad would last longer than it did? What was, or
No,
was
because,
it the two of you against the world from quite an early stage?
No, because Neil was 20 B&H in a Ford Fiesta, so that was never going to last, was it? At 16, I sold myself very short. But Neil
So
was
you
young.
knew what you were signing up for when you had him then.
Yeah,
you knew...
I mean, I just thought, I just didn't know what love was, because I'd never been loved, so I didn't know what love was, and therefore I was looking for all the wrong things in all the wrong places, and I got to that circumstance that I was in, and Ryan was everything. That was the most important thing to me. It was my chance to prove that I had some value.
Yeah.
And I was going to prove that I could be a good mum. But then I went wrong, you see, because I thought being a good mum was providing a clean home, because my house was dirty. Yes. It was awful. We wouldn't let anyone round. It was like squalor. People used to get fumigated, and we'd all talk about it with the neighbours. It was awful. So we were petrified of letting any of our mates round our house when we were young. So for me, providing a clean home and making sure that he had nappies that were all clean, and that he had his sleep time, and that he was fed, that was what I thought being a mum was. Yeah. Because it was only when I went to Sure Start and I realised that I wasn't giving him love. I wasn't reading to him. I wasn't nurturing him. Right. But I didn't know that it sounds really naive, but I didn't know that those things were important.
You can't be what you can't see.
Exactly. Yeah. I thought I was being the best I could be. Yeah. I thought I was doing everything. My house was clean. I was going to work. I bought him. I used to go to charity shops and get him the best baby clothes. He used to walk there. It was like Christmas getting him the best thing. He used to walk to the posh bit, because we lived on a council estate, and I'd walk to the posh bit down. I was on Bridgehall, and we call it Bridgehall Bramhall, because Bramhall's the posh bit of Stockport. I was in Bridgehall, and we walked from Bridgehall to Bramhall to charity shops there, and on the day I got paid, and then I'd get him a jumper and a pair of tracky bottoms or something that were Adidas or something, and I feel like I've won the lottery, and I felt like that was being a good parent, but I didn't understand the nurture bit that I'd missed out on.
And Sure Start, you'd see other parents, but you'd also have, because they knew what they were doing when they set it up, you'd also get guidance from...
I went on the Webster Stratton parenting course. It was like the most, it was like a revolution to me. I was like, oh my God.
Was it a political moment as well? Did you know that had been put there by Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and New Labour?
I didn't know at that time, no. Okay. No, I was completely oblivious to it at that time.
Didn't matter?
It didn't matter.
You were just filling your boots?
It was just another one of those things. Health visitor says, go along to that. And it's like, okay, it's somewhere to go for a couple of hours.
So Ryan's 2 or 3 by the time this happened?
Yeah, so Ryan was developing everything, and he was doing great. And then the health visitor had suggested that, his behaviour at times, he was a bit unruly, and he never slept, because I don't sleep. He works at a nightclub now, because he's like me. We're nocturnal. We don't sleep. We both have it. My dad had it and my nana did, so we sleep very little. So him being a baby, that was tricky for me. It was tiring. Sure. So they suggested that I went along to the clinic, to the Sure Start Centre, and meet other mums, because it had helped me feel a bit better about it. And they said there was a new course called Webster Stratton Parenting course that you could go on, and I went on it, and then realised that I wasn't even telling my son I loved him. I wasn't reading him a bedtime story, and I didn't realise these were important things. Sure. And that it was such a big moment for me. And
did you fix it? Did you flick? Did you? I mean, you can't. Rome wasn't built in a day, but you knew that you could turn this oil tanker around.
I still struggle.
Really?
I still have to train myself to. Like my kids I've got a 12 and 13-year-old. So my son's 24 now. I saw him on Saturday. I gave him a massive big cuddle. I was so proud of him.
People won't believe this, but you are actually a grandma.
I am a grandma. Yeah, she's 3 now, Lil.
But what does she call you? Does she call you Nana?
Yeah, she calls me Nan. Yeah, she's great. But this was another moment for me, because when Ryan had Lil, he just naturally cuddled her, and I knew that things had changed.
But also that you'd got something right.
Yeah,
you must have given yourself a break.
Yeah, I did. I thought this has changed something.
Right, we've broken a cycle.
Exactly. And because I have to train myself to get cuddles still now. So my 12 and 13-year-old, my Charlie, Jimmy's a bit more like me, a bit more miserable. But Charlie is like the most cuddly kid you can ever have. So he's like, Mum, can I give you a cuddle? Mum, I love you. Mum. And I find it still that I have to train myself not to hesitate and to enjoy the cuddle.
Yeah.
And that's really sad because, I don't know if it's too late for me now. I'm more cuddly than I used to be, but, I still find it difficult. And I think that's because of my childhood.
Well, it must be because of your childhood.
But it's breaking that cycle because I know how important it is to work at it.
Yeah.
And I know how important it is because I've seen it.
What was it about the people in the Sure Start Centre that cut through your suspicion of people in positions of authority or people in positions of... What was different about that from all the other people you'd encountered?
Yeah, because the way the government of the time set up Sure Start, it was done within communities.
Yes.
And they recruited coordinators from the community.
So you'd know someone,
so
or you'd know someone
them.
Who knew someone.
You knew them, they'd be off... So
been at school with a sister or something
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. So they were people who had grown up on the estate. So it wasn't people coming in.
Okay.
So they deliberately had a strategy in the early Sure Start days because, we're talking 98, 99. The deliberate strategy when Sure Start was set up, and I think it was a great brainchild at that time as well, and it nods to them understanding what was happening in communities at the time, is that instead of people in suits coming in, it was people within the community were given opportunities to train up as workers within it. So there might have been a suit somewhere along the line.
No, but
the people who you were chatting with and speaking to were people who you knew.
You,
yeah, people like me, yeah. Exactly.
So then college after that?
I went to Stockport College.
To do your MVQ in social care, your level 2 MVQ.
Well, actually, I went to Stockport College and did BSL because I was bored. So I did British Sign Language. Just because I could get free education in them days.
So this is the thing, isn't it? There's a brain that you have never had the privilege of properly feeding or training, but nonetheless, that is evidence that it was still going. Feed me. It's like,
but I'm a vocational learner as well. I've realised that.
You want input.
Yeah, and I've realised I'm a vocational learner. So being in Parliament's a great vocational trick to learn. So I've excelled at that. But
so you moved from BSL into.
So then I went into home care, and this is another nod, and I didn't know at the time it was a nod to the Labour government, but Labour government at the time brought in minimum standards in care. So they brought in that anyone who worked in the care sector had to have a level 2 or be working towards a level 2 in vocational qualification in care. Okay. Because care standards at the time weren't very well. Anyone could just wander in and look after some of the most vulnerable people. So the Labour Party at the time, the Labour government said, we want standards, minimum standards. So therefore, the employers then had to train us on things like manual handling, so you didn't just yank someone up the bed. On hygiene, food hygiene and things like that, so that if you were cooking a meal for someone, you didn't food poison them. So it was a very prudent move on the Labour government at the time, but it did massively not only increase standards in care, but it gave us opportunities to learn. Some of us who had dropped out of school like me, who had never enjoyed learning before, and it gave us a skilled workforce.
Right.
So it took us from manual workers who often dropped out of education or had raised the kids, often women, who work part-time, into a skilled workforce.
Skilled qualified workforce.
Skilled qualified work. And not only that, not only did they go level 2, but part of my role when I became a union rep is we brought in delivering the workforce, which was how they could go from an MVQ level 2 into auxiliary care, and they could even become nurses. Right. There was a career structure. Yeah. I remember women who had worked alongside, whose kids were as grown up as my Ryan, and they were in their 50s and they'd not finished school, and then they were getting foundation degrees and wearing gowns, and the kids were like on the pictures with them. They're proud of the mum. Yeah. But in the same time, that not only did they find the love of learning, but they massively improved the skills that the workers had. But then the retention of staff as well became much better, because once you were skilled and you had a career structure, obviously it created a formal mechanism for people to stay in the role.
And
it wasn't
fulfillment
considered
as well.
It actually did. Not only did it raise standards, but it created a career path and a structure for people to see care as something more than just a manual job that people do, like cooking and cleaning sort of thing.
Have we gone backwards since then?
Oh, massively.
Yeah. I thought so. I mean, I was just double checking.
I mean,
it's not a world I know anything about.
Yeah, because they fragmented the system. That's what happened.
They got rid of Sure Start as well.
They got rid of Sure Start. They got rid of Sure Start, Aiming High. They got rid of all of those programs that sort of penetrated into our communities. And not only that, but the care sector now is on its knees because of its. It's had loads of cuts, and because local government have seen austerity measures. Like literally all my colleagues were offered voluntary redundancy. In fact, my boss now still says I'm the last standing home help for a long time, because I was a union rep, so I wasn't technically, even though my substantive post was a home help, I'd gone into the union at this point. So he said, you were the last home help standing. But we got rid of them all. They were all offered voluntary redundancy because we had to cut the council budget, and then it went all into the third sector. And at the time, there was a lot of third sector workers and a lot of home helps that used to work for the local authority that suddenly set up at their own business, and we're doing extremely well. But then with austerity now it's hit, those contracts have become harder to fulfil. So lots of there is still some great ones out there, home care agencies, but a lot of them will say they just had to pack up tools
because the money
just got too tight, and the standards slipped. And now, because we were in a position in Stockport Council, we got to a position where we were working with the GP practices on keeping people at home. We were literally getting money from the CCG to look after complex care cases in their own homes, which meant that actually the burden on the acute services was reduced significantly, and it worked. This is why I get so annoyed by this,
because there are achievable goals, there are solutions,
and it's not always about throwing loads of money at it
or about ideology.
Because putting someone in a hospital is, especially if they're elderly, what it does is it stops them having their independence, so they grow more dependent, they lose the ability to do things that they've always done for themselves. It often means it costs more. Doctors, a hospital bed and everything else costs more than somebody being cared for in their own homes. But because we don't have the home care anymore...
Oh, I see.
People are going in. Most people, elderly people, are going in hospital because they're literally not had a drink. They're dehydrated.
They'd rather be at home, and it would be cheaper to have them at home, but the system has become so buckled.
But the system's so buckled, and there's not the cross-pollination.
Of course.
So I had a programme in Stockport. One of my proudest achievements was working with, because I straddled health. I was a Unison rep that straddled health and local government, and never tell the two meet in often cases, because one's the NHS and the other one's the poorer cousin, local government.
The problem, isn't it?
So you couldn't get a KPI, you couldn't see the end product within. So the budget from the hospital was not going to trickle down into local government because you couldn't see the KPI at the same place or the outcome where the money savings were. So it became a real barrier to get people to do the right thing.
Bonkers. And
therefore people were unnecessarily being treated in the acute stage, whereas actually if we'd have given them, if we prescribed every elderly person getting a one call a day to see if they've drank a cup of water, we'd reduce the amount of admissions into hospital overnight.
But the money would turn up on the wrong balance sheet.
But the money would turn up on the wrong balance sheet.
Which is what you mean
and
by
how do you measure that? Yeah, exactly.
That's frustrating, and it's a beginning of an answer to the next question, which is, well, I just for reasons of time, we'll skip over the working, as a home carer, and I want to hear about the burgeoning realisation or ambition to be a trades union representative. How did that happen?
That happened.
And before you do that, if I met you now, at this stage in your life, when you've left college, you've got your MVQ, you've started work, and I said, are you a political person, Angela Rayner? What would you have said?
Not a chance, no. No, I wasn't. Definitely not.
I didn't think so.
No, I definitely wasn't. No, I wasn't a political person.
But you wouldn't have been Angela Rayner yet either, would you?
No, my dad used to get the Daily Mirror every day, and that kind of makes sense now, but that was about as political as it got in our house.
So what happened? When did the siren lure of the trade union movement break through your...
So what happened was I worked in the agencies, and then I'd worked there for a while, and the girls who I worked alongside said, you've got experience now. The council are looking for people to do home care. So they pay your holiday pay and they pay your travel time.
Right.
So I went to apply for a job working in the local council to get better pay in terms of conditions. And I was one of the last home helps to be appointed by the council before they started outsourcing it all. So I come from the private sector where the terms and conditions were less. We'd have a 12-hour shift that we'd do in 6 hours. You go figure how we did that. So obviously we robbed people of care. I didn't see it that way. It was just the way it was
to get through the day.
Organised. So someone would have an hour call. You'd try and get it done in 35 minutes. So now I look at it and think that's just a really poor practice. But at the time, that was the way in which we were doing things. So when I went into the council, it was all different. We actually had the time, and we were told we had to spend the whole 50 minutes.
To be glib, because the profit is not the only priority.
Exactly, yeah. So we were told you have to do that. You stay with the service user for the length of time you're meant to be there. And things were very different. We were trained, we were given manual handling training, and I realised that, it wasn't just a case of it's too much ball ache to get a hoist out. Actually, it's really important to not dislocate somebody's arm unintentionally.
Yeah.
So things like that. I mean, I know it sounds really ridiculous, but they did make a big difference. So I worked in the council and realised that actually we were giving more time to care for people, and the standards were much higher in the council.
Okay.
I saw that for myself.
And
then the council were proposing to outsource the home care. That's when I got
which would
political.
have sent everybody back to the terms and conditions.
So
that you were
I
on
literally
before.
was in the meeting room, and I'm like, this is really bad. I worked for the agencies. Like,
Also,
they don't
I presume a bit disbelieving almost, because you've seen it.
Yeah,
and
I'd
the
seen
idea
it.
that you're going to go back that
Exactly.
way, you're going, what are you thinking?
I was like, this is not
Genuine
good. Like, we
frustration.
didn't have the time. We
Yeah.
literally was rushing around
Yeah.
and not looking after people properly because we didn't have the time. Why do you think this is going to be a good model to take forward? So I was like genuinely a bit upset by this, and I'd raised it with management saying this is not a good idea. We look after some of the most vulnerable, because the council used to take on the hardest cases because the agencies wouldn't have them.
No, because there's not enough money in it.
Because there isn't enough money in it. So we always used to get the complex cases as well. So I thought this is going to be really bad for us as carers, but equally it's going to be bad for what we're trying to achieve. So I was, I was quite vocal about it. And then after the meeting, the girls, because I was one of the last home helps in, so a lot of the girls who I worked with were older than me. They'd been there a while. And they were like, Ange, you should be our union rep. And I'm like, what's a union rep? And then I became their union rep overnight. I joined the trade union that day and became their union rep. And it was
just so that you could speak up more effectively for what you would have thought was stating the bleeding
the girls
obvious.
elected me.
Right.
They were like elected with their feet and saw me confront management and thought, she's all right.
And you went in, speaking of feet, you went in feet first from day one.
I did, and I've not stopped
Stubbs
ever
up.
since. I've not stopped ever since. That was my mandate to do.
And that's when you became political.
Yes, basically, because then my union at the time, I was fighting the outsourcing. And then I learnt more about this is a design that was part of the government's agenda at the time.
So what year is this now?
This is probably around... It was still under the Labour government.
I was going to say this is the last couple of years of Labour.
Yeah, so it's probably about 2005.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so again, it was
so long before austerity.
Yeah, and because I remember I did a day in the life of a trade union for The Guardian, and if anyone reads it, I took Tony Lloyd to task on something that he said as a politician.
I did read it, but that was late. That was later, actually.
Yeah, that was a bit later, but that was when I was getting quite political. Yeah, so it was around 2005, I think, something like that.
I'll just for people who haven't seen it, I'll just refer to that briefly because it tallies so nicely with some of the stuff we've covered, and it took, because you talked about that sense you get when you've helped someone, and this profile picked up on that and talked about the cards that you had up in your office and the people that you'd actually helped and people that the interviewer or the profiler encountered who could sort of thank you personally for things that you'd done for them, which is that's who you are. That's the politician.
Yeah,
emerging.
and they noticed my interpersonal skills as well.
Did.
So I spoke to the council legal executive at the time, and I was just going about my daily business, and I could speak to the cleaner and then flip to the next meeting with the director of social services, because I just had that ability to treat people with respect and not see titles but actually see people.
So in many ways, the next bit is fairly easy to understand, and it didn't happen that quickly. I mean, we're 2014, you got selected to fight Ashton-under-Lyne after David Hayes retired. So a good 10 years, give or take, working for Unison. You cut your teeth.
I did, yeah.
You
but
also
I was going after Gordon Brown, actually, because it was single status and equal pay.
Yeah.
And at the time, the councils didn't have the money to pay the home helps the money that they'd not given them in equal pay. So my union asked me to go and lobby then Prime Minister Gordon Brown, and it was like a Made in Dagenham moment, you're to be seen sort of thing. And I was just like, I was in number 10 and this is the Prime Minister. And I called him Gordon as well, and my mum was mortified. She said, he's the Prime Minister, did you call him Gordon? I said,
your place.
And now I've got his number, so it's all right, it's all fine. We're on first name terms now. But at the time, I was sent in there to lobby the government.
You were sent in there to do a job.
To do a job, to get money, to get capitalisation so that councils didn't have to make a load of home carers redundant to pay them the back pay they owed them for their money that they historically had, not given them as predominantly female staff. So that's how I learnt my politics, basically. That's how I got involved in the politics through that.
At the coalface, metaphorically speaking.
And I was asked to go in and speak about what it's like to be a home help, to try and get the money out of them.
So it was less of a leap from trades union rep to candidate and then MP than it was from home help to trades union rep. Or, did it feel... Well, you were approached, were you? Or you threw your hat into a ring? How did that happen?
Well, again, the trade unions, what happened is they felt that the Labour Party then, at that time, had sort of lost its roots. Yeah, they felt that they were getting special advisors and it was coming through a particular route, and that ordinary working class and working candidates weren't
the John
really...
Prescott factor was in
they
retreat,
were basically getting absolutely annihilated because they didn't have a network or a fast track into this route that other people working for an MP had, and so the trade unions devised a plan to the Trade Union Labour Organisation, the TULO, which is the joint trade union, said, enough's enough. We need more working class people representing the Labour Party because they're getting further and further away from the working class of this country.
Quite prescient, wasn't it?
So then they started looking through their ranks, because for a long time, trade unions, they wanted to keep their own talent. They didn't want to give the Labour Party their talent. They needed the talent within their own food chain
to fight the battles with
the employer, etc. So, but they recognised that they needed to start bringing talent forward, and not only bringing talent forward, but if I run for selection, I haven't got the first idea about running a selection, financing, getting leaflets and everything else. So the machine wasn't there for working class candidates to come through, and therefore the trade union movement decided collectively that something needed to be done about that, and it was phenomenally successful.
Yes,
we had posties, we had all sorts of people coming in. Posties, shop workers. All of a sudden, all these manual workers suddenly were catapulted into Parliament.
And you romped home in 2015.
Yes, I did. Yeah, I did well. I did extremely well. But you've got to understand the context is in northern towns like my constituency, people had had enough of suits from London coming in all shiny saying we're going to rescue you from yourself.
Yeah. No,
and they'd seen what had happened in Scotland and thought, actually, we can look after ourselves, thank you very much. We don't need somebody to tell us that we need to be saved from ourselves. And they started the tide of our Labour membership decided that actually they wanted homegrown talent, and they wanted people that were going to stand up for their area rather than people parachuted in as they saw it.
It feels like a lifetime ago, 2015, given what's happened in between.
Exactly.
And I don't want to get into the factionalism, because I know you don't either. You gave your maiden speech fairly quickly after arriving in the House of Commons, quicker than most.
Yeah, well, let's get it over and done with.
Well, also, you drew a lot on some of the stuff we've been talking about. You set your stall out, didn't you? You told everyone who you were and where you'd come from and what you were there to do. And then by, a year and a month later, you're in the shadow cabinet, and that's when the nature of the spotlight that shines upon you changes, doesn't it? That's
really,
okay,
yeah.
Okay.
I literally cut my teeth in politics sense at the most brutalist of times. I was, because our front bench left. Yeah. And our backbench suddenly became en masse. Yeah, we were all brand newbies, and I suddenly had a portfolio at the most hostile.
Because you backed Corbyn in the Owen Smith battle, which hardly any other MPs, never mind front bench MPs.
Yeah, because I just felt principally that if you're a democratically elected leader of the Labour Party by the membership, you get a chance. Yeah. And that was it for me. It wasn't because I had any disrespect for Owen, because actually it was more awkward for me because I was in Owen's team at the time. Sure. I was his shadow pensions minister. Yeah. And I just felt fundamentally it was the wrong thing to do. So it wasn't because I had some great desire for Jeremy Corbyn. It was because principally, morally, I felt he had a mandate, and therefore he should be given a chance. But with that,
the next thing you know, you're in the shadow cabinet.
Next thing you know, I had about 18 jobs in the shadow cabinet, and
it's almost as many as you've got now.
It's almost like I'm going back to that, yeah. But in them days, it was a very hostile environment. None of us had media training and stuff. We'd had the training the unions had given us in preparation to be candidates. But I remember going on Channel 4 News with Jon Snow and Alistair Campbell, and Jon Snow saying, "Oh, you must know Alistair Campbell. I never met him in my life."
Amazing,
and then them two chatting about their personal trainer that they have and everything, and me sat there feeling like this is surreal. Right. I see these people on the telly, and I'm suddenly stunned.
Like that.
I was literally
no
thrown.
Was there? You were just landed. Your helicopter
thrown
dropped
straight
on the top
into
of the mountain.
it, and then asked like all these questions about, well, you know, what do you think about this and everything? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm brand new. You know, it's like literally, you know, training to be a doctor, and on day 2 of your medical training, then being open heart surgery. Do you know what I mean? It was really.
You're also
surreal.
a woman, and you've got a northern accent.
Yeah.
Which, in my experience, gives a certain type of journalist license to try and trip you up in ways that they wouldn't try and trip up journalists.
They were trying to do that with us
a background
anyway.
like mine, for example.
Yeah, they were trying to do that anyway. I mean, we were like, it was open season on us. Nobody expected us to get through the weekend, let alone anything else.
Were you ever scared?
I was, but I didn't have time to think because I was just thrown right in. It was like I say, it was like like I say, my childhood was such a crisis management. I was beaten up as a kid. I'd go out the house and I'd be looking around corner to see if the gang were there that were going to beat me up. So I'd worked in scary environments. I'd grown up in scary environments, and you know, as a trade union rep, management tried to sack people like me and everything. I knew about the miners and everything.
You've seen off
I'd seen off big problems like that in the past. So for me, I kind of just didn't take myself too seriously and just tried to get through each day. And again, I wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it for Jeremy at the time, who I felt had a mandate to stand, and I felt it was the right thing to do. And I was doing it by the membership, who I felt had made their decision, and who am I to go against that? So I felt I had a moral crusade for what I was doing. I felt I was on the right side to do it, even though it was an incredibly difficult thing to do at the time. And therefore, I was just trying to hold my own and not make myself look stupid.
What are the worst bits then in that period? I know that you've said that you've had panic buttons fitted at home. Some of the poison that politicians like you get sent is, I mean, just imagine, for people listening, imagine the worst thing you could say to a woman, and times it by 10. That stuff drops through your letterbox at work and
I think
to
the
a
worst
lesser
thing
extent
for
at
me
home.
was when my son, my eldest son, said, "Mum, it's not worth your life. Why are you?" You know, when he knows, he's seen the death threats again, he's seen the online abuse. My son's 24, he reads that. Can you imagine reading that about your mum?
No.
And he has to read that about his mum, and, you know, and all the stuff that's been said, and he's seen the panic buttons and everything, and he's seen the way we've had to teach Jimmy and Charlie about they can't go on TikTok and things like that. They wanted to set up their own YouTube channel, and I'm like, sorry kids, you can't do that. And they're like, why can't we? And I've had to explain to them certain reasons why they can't do things that other children do, because of my profile. And my eldest son was just like, Mum, is it really worth this? You know,
what did you say to him?
And I said, yeah, because if I don't stand up for our values, then what do we stand? If I just walk away, then who's going to stand up? Like, we're going to literally let the bullies win. The bullies never beaten me. You see, I like I say, I had a lot of adversity. The bullies never beat me, so I weren't going to let them beat me now. As I saw it, there was no way.
You've still got adversity. I don't know. I read, and I only read it in one of the profiles that I've looked at, that Charlie is born very premature.
Yeah,
and
23 weeks. Yeah,
and registered blind.
He's registered blind. Yeah, he was 455 grams when he was born, which is less than a pound, and the premature charts start at 500 grams. So he was off the chart basically. Charlie was. So he's my little miracle. He wasn't meant to survive, and it was only, again, by a stroke of luck, that the midwife was retiring. She'd been there 30 odd years, and there was a locum doctor on, and she took the locum doctor on to give me steroids and to give me a chance.
Really?
And if it wasn't for, her name's Anne, and if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have had Charlie, because she literally fought for me. She said, it's not going to be easy, and the chances are very slim that he'll survive. But she said, if you can hold on till morning when the consultant comes in, she said, I will get you your steroids. And she got me my steroids, and Charlie's 13 and doing tremendously well. But, you know, he had grade 4 brain bleeds that if me and you had him, we wouldn't be even probably alive, let alone talking. And yet Charlie's talking, walking, running. He's just such an inspirational, happy... He's the one that cuddles me all the time.
Yeah,
he's just like the dead happy one. So he's great.
So you're a working mum with 2 teenage sons, one of whom is disabled.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of pulls on you. Your career is, I mean, you know, is spoken of as a future leader.
Yeah.
I mean,
I do feel like, you know, and I said it in an interview once, and I think people didn't quite understand what I meant by it when I said I feel like I've abandoned my children. And that's because up to the age of them being around 5 before I became an MP, because let's not forget I was in the middle of all of this, right in the middle of a crisis, and I had loads of jobs. So, you know, being an MP means you have to be here Monday to Thursday pretty much. Your vote's in Parliament. You can't be in Manchester when they vote in Parliament. You have to physically vote in Parliament. So that took me away from my children, and therefore the lion's share of looking after my children went to my husband then. And I felt like I'd abandoned them because, again, that feeling of the way in which you look after your children is by cooking, cleaning, looking after them in all the ways that I was trained by my elders when I was growing up. So I had this sense that, you know, and then by the time we'd finished the Brexit, the Corbyn era, the stuff that we'd had through the Labour Party, through everything that had gone on in politics, and we'd had like 3 general elections in like 5 years as well. Let's not forget, had 2 leadership challenges and everything else. 5 years had gone and my kids are suddenly teenagers. They'd gone from 5-year-olds to like,
blink of an eye.
Yeah, and I sat there, and it was actually COVID that did it to me, because when COVID happened, obviously we were all suddenly locked down, and Parliament had suddenly stopped.
And you can vote.
And I was at home,
Yeah.
and I suddenly realised that I wasn't required at home anymore. I was like, in fact, the kids were like, Mum, can you just get off the Zoom? Like, you're disturbing us. Because they got so used to me not being there.
Oh, that's good and bad.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're amazing. They're resilient. They love me to bits. But I realised that my relationship had changed with my children because of my job. And that's true.
And that is the price you pay.
That is the price I pay. Yeah, you can't have it all.
Final
we try
question.
to think we can, but
no,
you can't. Something has to give.
And also, you know, it's a strong marriage, presumably. And
it is, and that's the other thing, you know, the feminist in me says that, you know, he's done a great job. He's doing great. He is. He's a fantastic father, and the kids haven't lost out at all because of it. But it's just my own sense of feeling like I've not done the right thing, because those pressures that we apply to ourselves and what we think is the best way in which how we're supposed to behave. And as I was a mother, I felt like I had done wrong, whereas actually most blokes used to do that. They used to be the ones that went out. So I pay for the mortgage and everything. I am contributing, and I come home at weekends and say, hi kids, and I do the things that the traditional blokes used to do and upset everything that Mark's rules that he's put in place. And I'm the good cop. I'm the good cop. And
dispenser of joy.
Yeah, and he just goes and has to discipline them and get me to school.
I know you've undone it in 2 minutes.
Exactly, yeah.
Final question. You know, you're on the merry-go-round, but you're also, as I've mentioned, seen as a politician with a bright future, and yet you're motivated by a desire to improve people's lives. How do you square the big picture with the little picture? So as a social worker and as a constituency MP and as a trades union representative, you can see eyeball to eyeball the people whose lives you're improving. You can get handwritten letters off them. To Dear Angela. The more senior you become as a politician, the more the faces merge into a crowd, and you might still be doing great good, but you can't be as close to the beneficiaries of it.
Yeah, well, this is where my motivation to get into government comes from, because I spent 5 years basically, you know, developing early years policy. I've got a Sure Start Plus programme, a national education service that looked at tertiary education, and actually loads of in-depth work that was done, and it's basically sat on the shelf. And that's that to me. Whereas if we had an early years programme that invested that like proper childcare, you know, proper like educational childcare, people being given prevention and proper nurturing right in those early crucial years, I can see the benefit of that. I can see that because of my own life, and I can see that because of what it achieved when we was last in government. But I also have seen the last 5 years meant nothing, because my kids didn't see me, and yet I'm still not in government, and we've got universal credit cuts and people being hammered by tax hikes when they're, you know, some of the key workers on the lowest wages that have supported us through this crisis. So that's what motivates me to be at the top of the food chain, is because I know that having a programme that values people and gives people respect, like our workers programme, and that says actually a decent day's pay for a decent day's work. It's these simple things that actually make the biggest difference, and actually having a policy at a government level that you drive forward relentlessly. Like I was told by top civil servants that you've got to relentlessly push anything through, because being in government's very difficult even to get things done. It's not easy peasy. So I've got this relentless drive to make it count and to do something. I want a legacy that is bigger than just helping one or two. I want us to absolutely transform the lives of people. Like I had that pleasure and that privilege when I was growing up. People helped me. I say this to taxpayers. I say, like, literally, if you're a taxpayer in the early 90s, thank you, because you created me. That's it. That's what you do. Why do you pay your taxes? Because you supported me, you created me, and you stopped the cycle of deprivation that was in my family. That is your legacy.
Angela Rayner, thank you.
Thank you.